If someone at work says, I've got some names here, could you provide the ID and the job title from that? And here's the database. You could say, yeah, sure. You could simply do a Control and F, looking someone's name up. And there you go, the ID number and the job title. But what if you had a lot of queries? What if, say, you had 100 names to look up and the data was thousands of lines long? What could you do then? Well, you could do a Vlookup table, and to do that you would just start typing Vlookup. What do you want to look up? The employee's name. Where do you want the table to look at? Well, you want to start on the employee and the ID. And what's the column index number? Well, you want it to refer to the employee, but you want it to bring back the ID number, so it's column 2. And then you'd have to say, do I want a true or false exact match? Well, exact match is always best. Close brackets. Great. And you can just copy that down. Then, how do I get the job title? Again, you could start typing the Vlookup. What do you want to look up? You want it to look up their name, the table array. Now this time the job title is to the left of the employee, whereas before, when you wanted it to look for the ID number, you're looking to the right. Okay, so let's try that then. Let's include that table there. Column index, this time surely it'll be number 1. And false for a true exact match. No, it doesn't like that. So you may be thinking, well, perhaps I got the column index number wrong. Perhaps it's a -1. No, it still doesn't work. So in this case, Vlookup doesn't work because you're wanting it to look up the employee name and find the job title. Unfortunately, the job title is to the left of what you wanted to initially look up. But Vlookup can only work from left to right. It can't go backwards. So what would you do in this case? Well, you could do a Xlookup. So how do we do that? So I'm just going to put Vlookup so we don't get confused. So I don't get confused. Right, and this one is going to be Xlookup. Okay, so again, instead of starting to type Vlookup, you would start to type Xlookup. And once Excel thinks it knows what you want, it highlights it, so then you can just press Tab. What is the lookup value? Again, you want it to look up the employee name. Press comma. It's now asking for the lookup array. So where do you want that name to be looked up from? Well, there's a table here. You could manually highlight the names in the column, or you can just highlight the whole column. Comma. The return array, what do you want it to find once it's found the name? Well, you want the ID number. You could manually highlight all the ID numbers, or you could just highlight the whole column. Then it asks you a new one, if not found. So it's basically saying, if that employee doesn't exist, which you've been asked to find, what do you want it to say? I'm just going to put not valid. Close brackets. So again, it brings up exactly the same criteria. But notice what happens this time when you want to look up the job title. The lookup value, employee name, comma, the lookup column or row. Again, you want employee, you want to look up the employee. The return array, you want it to return the job title this time. If it can't find it, what do you want it to say or do? Not valid. Close brackets and enter. And then just double click on the bottom right hand corner and it copies it all down. So you notice there that the Xlookup does find the job title based on the employee's name, whereas the Vlookup couldn't. The Vlookup can't go backwards from the column that it's initially looking at, whereas the Xlookup can go left, right, up or down. Let's take another example. Suppose let's put a dummy name in here and see how Vlookup compares to Xlookup. So I'm going to put a made up name in here and I'm going to copy that Vlookup down. It's come back with an error because that name doesn't exist. That's fine. But let's have a look at what happens when we do the same with the Xlookup. It's actually come back with not valid. Now the reason why is because built into Xlookup there was that if not found criteria part to the formula, whereas the Vlookup it just has doesn't match or not. Now what you can do is nest an if error function there, value if error not valid, and then it will come back. But that's the thing, if you look at the length of the formula of the Xlookup compared to the Vlookup, there's so much more you've got to remember when you do a Vlookup. You've got to nest the if error surrounding the Vlookup table, whereas the Xlookup it already has an option built in if not found. So I think you'll agree that the Xlookup function is a lot more efficient than the Vlookup, and from now on there's really no need going forward for me to use a Vlookup or an Xlookup, which was similar to the Vlookup but it looked horizontally instead of vertically, whereas Xlookup it can look up vertically, horizontally, and it's not limited in the criteria that it looks up. I hope you found that interesting. If you have any comments or ways which you've been able to use the Xlookup formula, please let us know in the comment section.